Hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm very inordinately pleased to welcome Karen de la Carrière back. And we should doubtless have fun, because you always do. Hi, Karen.
Hey.
And Karen will now promote the channel and make you subscribe using her
Yes, let's do that. The pitch first.
Yes.
John has been exposing Scientology and authoritarian cults for 37 years. 37 years.
Mm.
So he has masses of knowledge, masses of data, masses of facts. Now, there's no payroll. No one pays you, even though you are putting out truthful facts, educational facts, which are absolutely crucial to making important decisions. Now and again, I get a woman saying, my 14-year-old, they're trying to make her sign a CO contract. How can I handle her? What should I send her to read? Right? Oh boy, John Atack's channel and his books. Now, John wrote a book called A Piece of Blue Sky, and even that, he got ripped off. People downloaded it for free, not paying him a dime. They didn't pay him, but they got all the riveting. It was a riveting book. I stayed up reading it. So I'm telling you all this stuff to ask, could you please click a donate, even if it's small, $5, but please contribute to the channel. Most of all, we want you back and back and back as audience. Hit the subscribe button, a little bell will pop up, click the bell, and you'll be notified of new episodes from John. Not just John and me, any new episode. You won't be spammed. You won't get oodles of email from, all you get is information when there's a new video. If you can do a Patreon, which is a few dollars a month, John would really welcome and appreciate that. So please, please be a participant, not a spectator, just hitting, running and looking at some stuff, a participant, co-creating this with John by donating something for him. Okay, that's the business out of the way.
Pitch, that's good. Thank you so much, Karen. And please leave comments and look through the videos we have, because we didn't think about this when we started this, because there were just 2 or 3 things we felt like saying, but we've now put up, I think we've put up about 400 videos. And so you can search and look for Scientology things. For anybody that's been involved in Scientology, I think there are 2 crucial pieces, which were the lectures that were given in Toronto in 2015, when I did the Getting Clear of Scientology conference there. They're both on the channel. The first is my introductory lecture there, where I talk about Ron Hubbard's background with pictures and some details. The second, I think, is maybe the most important thing I've done. I spent years talking with my good friend Steve Hassan and saying, look, you're an expert on hypnosis. Why don't we look at Scientology from that perspective? Because Hubbard absolutely admitted that he was a hypnotist. He'd been hypnotizing people from the age of 16. The original Dianetics method, when he cancelled book 1 in 1951, he said it's because it's hypnotic. And sadly, it came back again in 1977. So he was a hypnotist. And he, of course, said, never believe a hypnotist. So he was a hypnotist. We should never believe a hypnotist. So there's a piece on there where Steve Hassan, Christian Sherko, and I think it may be Chris Shelton's first public appearance there back in June 2015. But the 4 of us talk about, what the training routines do, what book 1 auditing is doing, and to watch out for the states that you can achieve, the kind of euphoria, the auditing high that comes along. So I'd recommend anybody that's been in Scientology, go and have a look at that on the channel. But there's so much else, you know, many years of thinking. You can find out about enlightenment and mindfulness and all sorts of things on here. But today, we're going to find out some more about Scientology. And let me do the pitch the other way, which is to say that Karen de la Carriere is one of only 8 people, I believe, who is qualified at the highest level in Scientology. She is not simply a class 12 auditor. There were 50 of those in all. She is also a class 12 case supervisor. And she was the senior technical person at the Flag Land Base. How long were you in charge there for? How many years were you doing things there for, Karen?
I was in Clearwater for 8 years.
8 years.
And in the last 2 years I was there, anybody in any mental shape, suicidal, having mental breakdowns, just were dumped onto my plate. And I was told, fix it, handle it. And if I protested, this question was, are you saying hover technology doesn't work? Do you disbelieve that we can handle that? John, it was one of the worst 2 years of my life. I couldn't sleep because I felt a Lisa McPherson happening was going to happen any day on my watch. And if I was the case supervisor, I knew I would be drawn and slaughtered, tarred and feathered. And I used to run to Clearwater Beach over the causeway. I would run to exhaust myself. I would drink CalMag because I told it would help me sleep. I would do it because I was so buzzing in fear of who I was handling. I would get in people, John, that would threaten to go to the 12th floor of the Fort Harrison and hurl themselves off the balcony outside the Crystal Ballroom and fall onto the cement. And they would say, how would you like that? How would you like the Clearwater Sun to record my death? This was my daily bread, morning, noon, and night. And why did we have these people that belonged in very structured, institutional, like real places where appropriate therapy would be given them? It's because Scientology was greedy. All the execs, middle management, senior, they wanted cash. They could care less about the only after the Lisa McPherson wake-up call did they stop this illegal piece. Otherwise, you could be mad as a hatter. People would arrive and have in their medicine cabinet 16 different drugs they were taking daily. And they were in the class 12 HEC. And it was my neck as a class 12 CS to handle it. Oh, God, what a nightmare. I don't know how I lived through it. Nobody died on my watch. Nobody knocked them, nobody killed themselves. But I was protecting the flight service all from catastrophe at the expense of my wear and tear. Anyway.
And it may well be that you're actually the only person who can say that, because when I investigated deaths in Scientology, I was really quite shocked. On the Lisa McPherson case, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, she didn't win the Pulitzer for anything to do with Scientology, but she started researching the case, and she called me up at one point and she said, I found, I think it was 7 or 8 other deaths in Clearwater that are suspicious.
Yes.
And so that was just there. And looking, from 1950 onwards, the suicide rate in Scientology, by my reckoning, is about 10 times what it is in the normal world. And that's the ones that we find out about because they are so good at clamping the media down, silencing people. So you don't audit people anymore, do you? Is that right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Good to know.
That is Scientology.
I mean, I
Anyway,
used to start a few years ago. I used to start talks. I remember at Dublin in 2015. I said, "My name's John Atek, and I'm a recovering Scientologist. It's 37 years since I last picked up the cans, however long. But I've never had the desire since the last time I was audited was on OT5, finishing OT5. I had a PTS rundown actually because I asked for one because I'd never had one." And declared that I was actually PTS to Ron Hubbard, which I think is a pretty fair definition of Scientology being a potential trouble source because of Ron Hubbard. But looking back, I realized there's never been a moment where I've gone, oh, well, maybe I could do with a session or something like that. No, and I feel great. I feel better, 37 years later for sure than I did when I left Scientology. So there is hope if anybody is worried about what might happen to them if they don't pick up the cans often enough. So there we are. We were going to talk about what were we going to talk about?
Oh, I wanted to bring in the Marianne Guinn story. I thought.
Could you spell the surname for me?
Guinn, G for God, U for Uganda, I for India, N for Norway, N for Norway. Guinn.
Guinn.
Guinn. Sounds Irish, Scottish, or something. Guinn, McGuinn. Anyway.
Yeah, something like.
Marianne Guinn lived in a little town, suburb of Oklahoma in the 1970s. And she was having an affair with the mayor of the town, but the mayor was a married man. And she belonged to something called Church of Christ. And
is this the Boston Church of Christ?
Church of Christ is very national, but it's not called Boston Church of Christ. It's called Church of Christ.
Kip McKean founded this thing, and wherever it goes, it's the London Church of Christ, the Boston Church of Christ, whatever.
I see.
So it may be the same thing. I think they threw him out in the end.
So the head honcho of the church, the senior minister, said, "You have to stand up this Sunday and tell the entire public that you have been having sex with the man." Now, in the 1970s, in small town America, you confess to something like that, you can't even get a job. You're a woman of shame.
Yeah.
Sex was not liberated. And
people didn't used to have sex back then at all. I think it was illegal, wasn't it?
So she said, "No, I will not." And he said, "You know what? If you don't, I will. I will announce." And not only that, we have a couple of satellite churches around. I'll have it announced in all our sister churches. So she went to a lawyer. And the lawyer said, this is why I'm telling you this story, because if you can walk away with some education from John's wisdom, education, then watching the show had benefit for you, wanted to have benefit. The lawyer said, they are acting as if you're under their jurisdiction. And they can punish you, they can whip you, they can smear you. You have to put in right, my law office will do it, that you completely resign from their governance, that you are no longer a member of the Church of Christ, and you don't even believe in their policies and doctrines, and you don't believe in this public shaming. So he crafted the letter. So they got it that she was no longer a member of the Church of Christ, but they went through with their threat and they announced it to the whole of these satellite churches and every church that she was having sex with the man. So she took them to court, the same lawyer, and she won something like $500,000. Which in 1970 money, we're into like a multi-million-dollar. because
Benjamin.
what the law courts determine is that an authoritarian religion, cult, whatever, they can do what they want, but not to a public who hasn't subscribed and voluntarily given. You see, permission belongs to you, not the church, not the cult.
Yeah.
Permission to be a member comes from you. You can withdraw that governance. You can announce. That's why people who wrote resignation letters were good. It needs to be more explicit. If you're thinking of leaving, John is going to amplify this story with a little more. You see, when they declare you, they're still acting like they go to, you have to do A to E. Your only terminal is the IJC. What the hell is, what? They've declared you, you're gone. Maybe you already blew and now they declare you. That's usually what they do. They feel ashamed that you walked out. So they declare you after you fled. They did that with me. They did that with Brenda. Brenda fled. Marty and 1,000 others. They pretend that and then they put up these sites full of lies saying, we kicked them out because they couldn't live up to our high ethics. No, the person.
High ethical standards of L. Ron Hubbard. Sorry.
So the lesson from Marianne Guinn is, if you are thinking of leaving, be sure you unlock yourself from their governance, and the courts have even used Marianne Guinn's, all courts look up earlier judges' rulings. The law system depends on how judges previously ruled. That's the way it works. So just blowing and escaping isn't enough. They can smear you. They can put up hate videos on you. You have to actually write and unlock yourself. That permission belongs to you. The permission isn't the cult saying, you can't leave us. You have that power. John?
Yeah, well, I wrote my letter of resignation on the 18th of October, 1983, to celebrate the anniversary of the Mission Holders Conference of San Francisco, which was the event, the reports of which had, caused me to distance myself from David Miscavige and his cohorts. Such a resignation, I think, is a good idea. I encourage people to do it because it's a clean break, and it's a way of alerting Scientology that you don't want to. You're no longer a member, firstly. So, as you say, you're no longer bound by any of the rules of Scientology. You revoke that. And you don't wish to hear from them anymore. And that's an end to it. You don't want to be on the mailing list. It is perverse. I mean, absolutely my favorite of all suppressive declare orders was Neville Chamberlain. Now, I knew Nev reasonably well in the 1980s, and he is a character, as anybody who's met him will say. And I guess if your parents, if you're born in England and your parents, for a bit of a laugh, their name is Chamberlain, they decide to call you Neville. Who's, I am a great fan of Neville Chamberlain, but there are only about 3 of us in the UK who realise that he actually, did the right things at the right time. But putting that aside, it's not really a good idea. So his parents had a bit of a laugh. They were friends of Hubbard's, and Neville, of course, was at one point. What happened was basically that a suppressive declare came out, which said that before he got into Scientology, Neville was guilty of pimping, violence for hire, drug dealing, this whole list of things. Now, we just have to add in a number here. Before he got into Scientology, Neville was 8 years old when he got into Scientology because his parents were friends of Ron Hubbard. So before the age of 8, and he is quite a character, he was already, and so they put this thing out because they got what's called an overt withhold write-up. And Neville said, he said, look, Jane Kember, who headed the Vicious Guardians office, one day said, right, you can't go home until you've written up all of your overts, all of your transgressions, your sins, your crimes. So Neville just made up this happy list of things. Jane Kember, not being an especially bright human being, was willing to accept this as the truth. And because she must have known, I mean, he was 16 when he joined the Sea organization, you know, so she must have known that he was a terrible youngster. You know, at primary school, you know, grade school, already pimping and selling drugs. So that caused them a certain embarrassment. He sued, I believe, or threatened to sue, and they withdrew this wonderful document. And after that, they just tell people that they'd been declared. You wouldn't get the crime sheet. But then they go around. I mean, I was horrified. Skip Press, he wrote a review of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, the unexpurgated edition of the book when it came out. And in it, he said that he'd read the original version and that had persuaded him to leave Scientology. And some people had come round to dissuade him of this. And they'd explained to him that Scientology had cured me of heroin addiction. Now, Skip just wanted to get on with things, but I was like, hang on a minute. Heroin addiction? What are you talking about? I've never even seen heroin in real life. You know, I've seen it on the telly and I've met people who've taken it, but they got this, you know, they start spreading these little rumors and lies about you. Now, I actually sued them at one point because they were showing 2 handwritten letters that I'd given them that were these kind of, you know, you make a life report when they'd asked me to start a celebrity centre in Manchester. And so they wanted me to write up my life history. And there was one before that for another thing they wanted me to do. And you get to sit down and write everything down. And I sued them because they were showing this to people. From my point of view, if there is any confidentiality, then there is the priest-penitent relationship. They claim to be my religion. There is the employer-employee relationship. They were seeking to employ me. There is the counselor-client relationship. They violated all 3 of those rules. And we just got locked in the court because they're so brilliant at, you know, keeping the judge away from the actual subject. And in the end, what happened was they'd asked me to put documents in which were about my income because I was suing for damages. And it was something like I'd put in my bank statements, but I hadn't put in my check stubs. And under the law as it stood at the time, they were actually able to kick the case out. 6 months later, the law changed. The Lord Justice Wolfe here said, it is the case in English justice that he with the deepest pockets wins, which was a pretty savage indictment. And they'd spent a huge amount of money finding a way of avoiding the truth, which was that they'd taken 2 confidential letters and shown them to people. That's how much they care about, you know, confidentiality. And there are many other cases. The one that's best traced is in the Clearwater hearings, which is the Adele Ernie Hartwell case, where Adele and Ernie both went over the rainbow. What an expression. They went to work for Hubbard on his dreadful technical films, not one of which is still being used by Scientology. That's how bad they were. And Adele ended up staying, but Ernie left. And they were, I think they were already in their 70s when they got involved. You know, they were retired. And what came out during the Clearwater hearings was that the guy who had gone through Ernie's confidential pre-clear folders to find the buttons with which to attack him testified. And so you got this straight line that Hubbard had ordered it directly, that a folder error summary be done to find Ernie's crimes. And then you got the guy who went through the folder. Then you actually got the agent who harassed him based upon this. So you got a clear demonstration of this violation of confidentiality. That leads to another thing. I've had quite a lot of people over the years come to me and say, I know terrible things about Scientology, but I'll never go public. because my children may one day read about my sexual exploits when I was a teenager.
I've had that same thing.
Exactly. And, I just decided that it was just going to be the way it was, that I'd done whatever I'd done.
That's the blackmail.
Yeah. And if you're a social human being, which is, about 97% of us are, then you don't really want the world to know the embarrassing things you've done. And if you are a real adult human being, you will have done embarrassing things. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But people are scared. Their phobia is induced and they become frightened of speaking out. There should be there's a, I got out, I think is the hashtag, which is the Me Too movement for ex-members of any authoritarian group. So, if anybody has a story to tell about, how they got out or why they got out of any group, then that's a good place to go and post it. That's my friend Mark Laxer, I think, working with Steve Hassan, they set that up. Good people. So, there's my reflection upon that. Would you like to?
If we could stream it down to the essence, the one thing that gets violated is trust, the word trust. You cannot trust the cult of Scientology. I'm talking about someone who did it all, did everything they offered, every rundown, every procedure, every bit of training. 40 years of it. Scientology is only there for its own survival. You cannot trust the cult. Look what happens when you have counseling in the cult. Every single session, in addition to the counselor writing down what you say, is videotaped. And it's videotaped in such a way that David Miscavige, wherever he is, can plug in to some master chamber and see any session in the UK, in Australia, South Africa. He can plug into a network, and this is supposed to be quality control. Tons of executives walk in and out of this bank of TV screens to watch what the auditor is doing. This goes on in every session, in every church. So you are on video. Not only are you on video, if you fill in an application to be staff or CO, the cult demands to know every sexual encounter you've ever had, what you did, for how long you did it, who were you with, did you use a toy, did you have depraved mental image pictures while the sex, they want everything. Now that's just asking for dirt. Look, I live spitting distance from Hollywood Boulevard. I'm in Los Angeles, the Hollywood area. And I have a lot of friends that work for Disney, because Disney has a huge monolithic structures of buildings, campus in Burbank. Burbank is adjacent to Griffith Park, where I'm located. And I have a lot of Disney friends. A lot of them were dancers, and I got into all this country. Now, Disney very much also wants your life history. They're worried that you come and get all their techniques, and then you run to sell it to South Korea, or because they've got a lot of secrets in their lighting and their technology and all that. So especially to get access to the Disney vault, where they have archival every movie they've made, the slideshows, the thing. So they've got secrets, but that's technology secrets, not secrets on dirt, on who went to Disneyland and are you on video. Now, not one question in the Disney life history asks about your sex at all. Not at all. They want to know all your previous employers. and your languages you speak, blah, blah, blah. Nice big life history, but nothing to do with your sex. Scientology wants it. It actually focuses on staff applications, on what have you done sexually. Now, the word is trust. If there's any word that you have to add alongside Scientology, it's distrust. You will be betrayed. If you look at their hate websites, almost everyone who served them 30 years, 40 years, 35 years, for pennies, built up the organization. They're all drug dealers, prostitutes, smugglers of nefarious products, cocaine dealers, but mostly there's a sexual twang in it. You were a pedophile, you were a rapist, you were a drunken rapist. If they can pull in your sexual activity, and I don't think they realize how this makes them look. How can a 30, 40-year person who practiced Scientology all this time be so outrageously criminal? And they go over the top in wife beater, multiple rapists. They just, it doesn't. This is Scientology. You give them money. You go on those cans while you're being recorded, every word you say. And later, if you leave the church, what you said can be distorted, even embellished and exaggerated. And the hate website will be up.
I had an Anglican minister who became very concerned about a Scientology center being put in his town. And at a meeting, a Scientologist came up to him and explained to him that I had attempted murder. I was a rapist. I was a child molester. I was a drug dealer and all of this sort of stuff. And when similar ideas were put to a judge, the judge pointed out to the Scientologists that they'd had 9 years to resolve these behaviors in me, and how had they failed?
Good answer.
So, soon after I left in 1983, I talked with a guy who'd been an ethics officer at St. Hill in Sussex, headquarters in Sussex. And he said that every day he and the other people in the ethics office, and this had gone on for a year or two, they would look through folders and find the most extreme things they could and read them out loud. So they knew who they were talking about. They knew who had done this. One should not have any confidence in the confidentiality of Scientology. Anybody that wants to film you while you're confessing they belong to the secret police. They don't belong to a religion of any kind. Yes. This is something that should be done quietly and without any recorded trail. And you should, at the end of it, be forgiven. And while Scientology pretends through the proclamation power to forgive, and I was given the power to forgive by Ron Hubbard. I managed without him, though. This ridiculous idea that you're being forgiven, you're not being forgiven. Not only are you not being forgiven, but anything you said will not only be used in evidence against you, it will be exaggerated in evidence against you, and there will be lies added to it. It fascinated me on leaving Scientology that nobody who's familiar with them believes a single word that they say against people. Yeah. Because they are known to be untrustworthy. So
in the media just know that it's a tissue of lies. The media, they look you up. They know it's all bogus, all But trust is a big thing, John. Trust is any relationship. As soon as there's infidelity, or as soon as you've gone out of the boundaries of trust, that's a deal killer.
Yeah.
And the most unworthy of your trust is Scientology. Unworthy. This is all bogus hogwash nonsense that there's priest penitent. This is not a priest penitent. As a senior tech person, John's explained to you how high up in the hierarchy of technology I was. 156 people have access to your PC folder. I'll rattle off some names. All the FESers, that's people who sit down and read every word you write to do corrections. The DFPs, these are people who interview you prior to you going in session. But there's usually one DFP and a deputy DFP. There's multiple. All of them can study and read what you've been talking about. Your case supervisor, the deputy case supervisor, all of RTC. If RTC called for the folders, RTC legal, OSA, Office of Special Affairs. They feel something going on here, send the folders. They can order and commandeer your private sessions, read every word, order, if it sounds, they can order the videotapes because you're on videotape. All of OSA Int, all of RTC. Then there's subcategories of that. For example, a higher org feels they can commandeer anything you said in a lower org. So now they can order those folders overnight sent. And now this whole thing gets replicated. The FESs here, the DFPs, not to mention the rotating, changing auditors. Every time you change auditor, that auditor can read everything you said. I listed these title by title. 156 people have complete access to what you very privately thought that it was just you and the counselor. Pay attention. What you say in a counseling session, 156 other people can read and gossip about it. John, I remember one girl, lovely girl, just a lovely girl, who gave up in a session that when she was 12 years old, she stroked the penis of her German Shepherd. I mean, she was 12 years old. She may have stroked it back and forth. It was just, what criminality could there be in a mind of a 12-year-old and her German Shepherd? She gave this up in a session. This circled round and round. Almost every staff member knew about it.
Yeah.
Those were the days when there weren't video cameras. How could multiple people know that she confessed to stroking the penis of a German Shepherd? And they were huge notes in her folder. This person engaged in bestiality. Definition of bestiality is sex with animals, and should never be put in an executive position.
Which is kind of an admission that Scientology doesn't work, isn't it, really?
Look, I've said that about, if you've taken LSD, you can't join the Sea Org. What? They have 5 drug rundowns. Dianetics drug rundown, Scientology drug rundown, OT drug rundown, Knox drug rundown. And they're saying no matter what drug rundown we give you, you'll never be cured of taking LSD. And you can never, this is the kind of proof that they know that the technology doesn't work. Anyway, so this girl eventually left. She always wondered why she never got promoted. She was stuck in some lower post. And the reason I tell that little anecdote is simply to say what she thought she was just telling, bearing her soul. You know, she felt some discomfort that she did that, so she gave it up. And the entire staff knew about it. And not only that, whispered about it behind her back. It was a gossip item.
I have a friend who, from the age of 6 or 7, was sexually molested by her Scientology stepfather. There is no doubt about this. He was convicted. He confessed. But Scientology didn't do anything about it. She went for 4 or 5 years with this carrying on. Just the worst of things. She went to the police at the age of 11 because a friend's mother had recognized that something must be going on. She made a statement to the police and was then persuaded by Jan Eastgate, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, to withdraw the statement and sent back to the household with the abuser. 5 years later, she joined the Sea Organization to escape that household because this man was violent and deeply unpleasant. But because he gave money to Scientology, there was never any discipline of him for what he did, because it's about money, isn't it? The governing policy of Scientology, for anybody who wants to look it up, Aaron Hubbard called it the governing policy, and it is make money, make more money, make others produce so as to make even more money. So that is the governing policy of the religion of Scientology, to make money. She found she was in the Sea Organization for 5 years, and she was immediately labeled as a sexual predator because it was her fault at the age of 6 this had been done to her. That's how much the reversal happened. All of the staff knew about this. You know, nobody would associate with her. She didn't get to date anybody because of this dreadful lie, which, you know, as we've said, they didn't have the right to share that information. That's appalling. So I suppose what we should say is, if you are involved with Scientology, leave. And if you aren't involved with Scientology, don't get involved. That would be our fundamental advice.
Well, leave, but be sure you take away their governance. Don't just,
and if possible,
out the door.
pick up your PC folders on the way out. I have known people who did that too.
Because 30, 40 years later, they're still trying to rope you in. You can get a letter from them soliciting you, trying to lasso you back. They do not believe, they still believe they have governance over you. Very, very important that you put it in writing, that you don't subscribe to their policies. You're not a believer. You're not completely. There was a guy, and it was unbelievable the way they let him go. He was int landlord. Tony Ortega did a whole site where he was int landlord, and he needed huge sums of money on construction and stuff. And he would walk into SB Hole. SB Hole is also called a dungeon. It's double wide trailers full of executives and windows that are barred that scream at each other and do sing. It's one flew over the cuckoo's nest. It's a madhouse. So execs have been thrown in there for torture sessions, and they live there. They have to sleep under their desk. They're marched like Auschwitz victims to take a shower once with left, right. The security guards mock as they march 2 in line. These are the top echelon execs of the cult. He has been in SB Hole. My ex-husband has been in for 7 or 8 years. 7 or 8 years. Now he's such a wreck he has a kind of Alzheimer dementia. He not even has his faculties. So look at the difference between me, who escaped, and look at Heber's mental health, who's in. All right, so
You're talking about this guy was the int landlord, did you say? Was
the int landlord, yeah. So yeah, let me just finish the story. So he would go in there into SP hole, he'd see all the madness, he'd get somebody to sign off, and he'd walk out of SP hole. Can you imagine getting an okay to take out 300,000 from someone who's declared SP? They're all declared SP. They've all been pronounced moral judgments that they are antisocial personalities.
Suppressives.
Suppressives. About 100 of them, all living in this dreaded. So he was absolutely brilliant. He wanted to leave, but he had been at int base 20 years, and he knew wanting to leave gets you into SP hole. So what he did is he reported in and said, I don't believe in any of this. I don't believe in e-meter. I don't believe in the technology. I don't believe Hubbard. And you know, they offloaded him in 24 hours without even a sec check. What do you do with someone who says, you're not clamping me down? I'm unhooked. I'm detached. And that was one of the easiest. I've told you a story now and again of an escapee, but just going up and saying, this is all hogwash. This is nonsense. This is a tissue of lies. This is a money extortion racket above all. John, a guy called me just the other day, and he had spent $70,000 on L11.
There's a single auditing set of procedures.
One rundown, one procedure, because it had needed a repair of the, each time they took fresh cash. Now, any normal ethical business, if you sell something that is messed up, a bad iPod, a lemon car that breaks down when it's new, anything, they give you your money back, or they give you a new one. A normal ethical business replaces their screw up with something good, palatable, or the money. In Scientology, you pay and pay and pay and pay for their mistakes. Now they tout to the world that they're making OTs, higher, more enlightened spiritual beings. Well, after they ripped off this guy for $70,000 on one procedure, he was gone. There was no intention to take him higher. The intention was to suck out as much money as they could. And if he didn't have any money left for anything else, screw you, take a hike, go pound sand.
Yeah, I mean, compassion is not an aspect of Scientology.
So I gave him a little, I think I helped him. I said, do you know the origins of L11? He said, no. I said, it came from handling a madman.
Bruce Welch.
Bruce Welch. This was the research sessions. And he said, you mean to say they were giving me a rundown meant for people who had mental breakdowns? I said, yes, that's the origin of L11.
And it didn't look like Bruce Welch, you know.
I told him the whole story of Bruce Welch, but you see, he was not a crazy person. So superimposing him tools and commands for a person dramatizing evil, Bruce Welch had his hatchet where he was screaming to kill.
I went away after our conversation, and to my amazement, a very old friend of mine, guy I've known for 35 years, said, oh, I was on the ship with Bruce Welch. And it's like First of all, got Mike Rinder doing guard duty to
Yes.
make sure nobody talked outside. Then we talked, and you told me about Hubbard passing little notes to him under the door, and that he'd wanted to kill Hubbard. And now I talked with this guy who'd known him on the ship for weeks, and he said he was the most mild-mannered and friendly human being. And so there's this other question: is that what drove him to want to kill Ron Hubbard, which was what the madness apparently was, that he'd threatened to kill Hubbard. What drove him to that? And it may be that he had a realistic perception of what Scientology was actually doing. The fact that after the INT rundown, the interiorization rundown, and List 11 were released, both of these researched solely and totally on Bruce Welch, that Bruce Welch was got rid of, offloaded as fast as possible. And as yet, nobody has come back to me to say what happened to him. But he wasn't cured, and he didn't stay in Scientology. And yet these two procedures are based upon it, one of which Lisa McPherson died on, the INT rundown, and the other of which your recent contact spent $70,000 on. It's there isn't anything else quite like Scientology. We must say that, you know, that it is the most elaborate and complicated set of rituals. Mike Rinder, when we last spoke, he said, "Oh, let's talk about history of man next time." And I said, "Okay." And I've almost finished reading it, realizing that I read it very quickly because it wasn't relevant. It wasn't on a course that I had to do any of this stuff. So I just thought, well, he was, you know, that's a little bit crazy for me, I'm afraid. Rereading it, I realized that Ron Hubbard was psychotic. I can't put it any other way. For anybody to believe the absolute nonsense in that book, that, you know, that it's a cold-blooded and factual account of their last 60, 70, 74 or 76 trillion years, because all four numbers are given in the book. With the new editions, they've corrected the start, so it doesn't say 60 trillion, it says 76 trillion, because later on, so within the 2 weeks that he and Mary Sue Hubbard and L. Ron Hubbard Jr. took handfuls of amphetamines to do the research into the last 60, 70, 74 or 76 trillion years, he'd forgotten what the date was by the time he was committing this in some way to print. And it's madness, you know, the thought that this in any way is a history of anything that we evolved from. Still, I'm going to do that with Mike, so let's not get into my outrage. Just crazy.
Mike would be good for that. Yeah.
We were going to talk a little bit about contracts, because Scientology uses great big thick non-disclosure agreements now, and there's a foundation in contract law which applies in the US as much as it does here. If there was any coercion involved in getting you to sign a contract, if you were drunk, if you were in a drugged state, if you were threatened in any way. So in Scientology, there's a simple one, which it's often very difficult to explain to lawyers and judges. I've seen looks of relief on many lawyers' faces when I joined a case and could explain to them what the Scientologists have been trying to tell them. The amount of coercion that goes into getting these contracts is more significant perhaps than any other coercion there is, because what you are told is, if you don't do Scientology, you will lose your immortality.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent in the Catholic faith of being condemned to hell. So it's okay, you don't have to sign this contract, but of course, if you don't, you'll go to hell. You will be picked up by the implant station in the between lives area and sent back down here forever, and you'll be miserable. So these contracts are, in fact, all of them invalid. It's just trying to get it over to a lawyer to understand that simple idea that if you don't sign the contract, you will rot in hell. And that violates a contract, because a contract it must be a consideration for both parties in a contract. Yes. I gain something, you gain something. The idea that what you're gaining is not rotting in hell is not really viable in law. So if anybody's having a struggle with that out there.
there was a lawyer who got shanghaied into joining the CO. She didn't go very much past the EPF. But being trained in law, she told me, Karen, the state of mind of this group is paranoia. Even in the EPF, you sign 1.5 inch thick paperwork. It's you can never sue, just on and on. Every possibility, every eventuality. And when you have to sign all these documents when they take you on for counseling, they rush it through. This is just paperwork. This is just formality. Sign, flip, just sign here. They just railroad you through it, and there's no way that you can say, may I take this home for my own lawyer to look at? Whoa!
Yeah, you're not given a copy of it.
Huh?
You're not given a copy of the contract. Under contract law, both parties must have a copy of the contract.
Right.
As the Marx Brothers demonstrated in A Night at the Opera, I believe it is, where we learn about the sanity clause, and there is in fact no such thing as a sanity clause. And certainly in Scientology, there's no such thing as a sanity clause. You don't get to read the contract. You don't get to take the contract away. The only time that you will see that contract is if you sue them to try and get back some of the money that they've gypped you out of, or some payment for the slavery that you served for them. That's a point where you will actually get to see contracts. And they're kind of like Facebook contracts, Google contracts, Amazon contracts, where there's so much of them that you want to get on and use the app, and you haven't realized that you've just signed away all of your data to Google, Facebook, and Amazon, you know. Bless them. But the religions of Google, Facebook, and Amazon.
There again, John, the underlying concept underneath all of this is trust. If this is a cult that will use any shenanigan, anything, to gain power and leverage over you, whether it's recording you and keeping the dirt on you to then embellish and twist, and or lock you in with contracts. You cannot trust an entity that so much wants their survival over yours that they will do whatever. In fact, that's one of its slogans. Do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes. Evil.
Yep.
No matter what, Scientology must survive against you. So there's a huge power imbalance, right?
Oh,
4,000 or 5,000 CO members all glummed together like a cluster, all thinking alike. Like I'm talking about a real cluster. They're BT cluster. The CO acts like a cluster. All these different beings acting as one. They're all glummed together. OSA, RTC, whatever. And the power imbalance is, how do you fight City Hall? Which is sort of analogy, right? City Hall is all these. So if you want to walk away from this video with two things learned, I've covered trust. Distrust is a deal killer. To get lured in, and remember, most of their secrets are not revealed to you till you're tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in. You're in, you brought your family in, your relatives in, they're all in. Now the hammer comes down. Now the revelation of all these attached spirits and volcanoes and xeno. Now truth gets revealed.
Much cheaper to just watch the South Park about Tom Cruise coming out of the closet and getting the OT3 material that way. I'm very happy to say that I made a slight contribution to that, because the version of OT3 that they rely upon is one that was used by the BBC, which I scripted for the BBC. So
Cool.
in 1986, a very long time ago. But I like the way that throughout the episode it says Scientologists actually believe this.
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah. You know, we can laugh at this and that, but more fundamental is the group is evil. Scientology is a malicious hate group. And if you go to their hate pages and you see the venom in it, and they call us antisocial personality because we reveal some truths about them, whereas they have this malignant hatred. And I thought to myself, okay, you call me whatever name you want. I will reveal a lot about you. I actually decided that the truth, even if I was a little reticent on this and that, I am on a pathway, and I love that I can come with you once a month, John. Let's really get into nitty-gritty.
The road to truth. I have a friend who left Scientology, and I think he was involved for more than 12 years and spent quite a lot of money. He was a businessman. And he said one day he sat down and he was thinking about this idea of the end phenomenon, the end product. Where does something lead? And he thought about Scientology, and he realized that the end product of Scientology is enemies. It's that simple. And he left that day. He just said, and it's true. It has become, you know, embattled and beleaguered. And Hubbard was so paranoid. And you have this terrible thing. If a thing is a truly useful therapy or a truly useful religion, you will actually become more individual, more unique, more different, more yourself. If it's bad, the opposite will happen, and you will be cloned. So you are more and more like some image of the leader, not actually the way the leader is, but you won't be your genuine self. When I left Scientology, I hadn't even thought about it. You know, I left because I thought Hubbard was gone and that nasty people had taken over. I pretty soon realized that Hubbard was still there. This is 1983, and he was still there. And that he was a charlatan, that he was a liar. And I hadn't really expected to go this route. I'd expected to be making Scientology, you know, work in the world away from the mother cult. And, you know, so I'd helped to found the independent movement, which persists to this day. And, but then one day I didn't believe anymore. And the sense of relief that I no longer had to conform my ideas to Ron Hubbard's, that I no longer had to make sense of the many contradictions and conflicts in his utterances, that I could actually absolutely and entirely think for myself. That was a great relief. And of course, it's a new state because you grow up as a child believing things, then you join Scientology. And when you leave, you have this choice where you can say, well, I will now construct my own view of the world. I'll take those bits and pieces that make sense. And to bring this to a conclusion, one of the most fundamental aspects of that is, as you say, in all relationships, for a positive and healthy relationship, trust is the first necessity. And you can't trust these people, I'm afraid. They have an other intention, a counter intention to the intention they state. It's not to liberate you, it's to enslave you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there we are. Is there anything you'd like to say or ask before I end this session?
Well, I'm very glad we covered trust. I'm very glad we covered just, you know, Scientology becomes a relationship. Once you enter in, it's almost like a marriage. You're locked in. It's a relationship. In fact, it's been said that there are 3 people in a marriage when you're in Scientology. You, your husband, and Scientology. And they will third party, they will, if the husband's acting up, they will poison the wife to divorce the husband.
Oh, yeah.
So there are three people, even private pillow talk gets knowledge reported. A Scientologist will turn in their wife on something sexual she said in bed privately.
Yeah,
Scientology puts three people in a marriage. You join Scientology, it's not just you and your spouse, it's you, Scientology, and the spouse. And I hope you've learned a thing or two on trust.
Well, let me give an example of exactly what you're talking about. When I first met Robert Vaughan Young and Stacey Young, they told me that 7 years before they left Scientology, they had each independently come to the conclusion that they wanted to leave. And for 7 years, they didn't tell each other because they feared they'd be reported by their own spouse. Now, the law in the US and in this country is very strict. You can't testify against your spouse. Well, in Scientology, you can.
Yes.
And you will be made to. You'll be made to. So, a bad idea, all in all.
Yeah. John, it was lovely getting together with you.
Yes, great pleasure.
Really, really, I think we covered some important issues. Just got some great ideas for the next show.
Well, write them down in a little list and we'll get to that in a month's time, eh?
Yes.
So, let's wind up this one. I'm John Atack. This is my lovely guest, Karen de la Carrière. And we thank you very much for your time and attention.
One last thing, if you've watched all the way to here, that means you were learning something, that means you were paying attention. Just go to subscribe. We want you to know when John speaks. You'll get notified if you click the bell. And if you can just try and do a Patreon, it doesn't matter what the quantity of money is. Just be a participant, not a spectator. A participant is when you are contributing to this show. Please do it.
Yeah, show that you
can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.